The world wasn't built for us, but we're building anyway. Welcome to Disrupt Your Money, where we talk about what it really takes to build equitable, impactful, and generational wealth in a system designed to keep marginalized folks from it. I'm Meg K. Wheeler, she, her, CPA, money educator, and founder of the Equitable Money Project. And every week, we're having the kind of conversations that spark change, the ones that challenge power, question norms, and move us towards collective wealth and liberation. Because wealth isn't just personal, it's political. Let's disrupt some money. Well, hey there, and welcome back to another episode of Disrupt Your Money. If you take a nap, someone is going to call you lazy. If you close your laptop at 5 p.m., you're just not committed. If you take a vacation, you're lucky. And God forbid you actually enjoy a slow morning, because clearly you're not hustling hard enough. These are all things that I heard and felt when I worked in corporate, and I'm guessing that maybe you've heard and felt these things too. Rest used to be the most basic human need. Now it is treated like a guilty pleasure that you have to earn, that you have to work hard for. And that's not on accident. That's capitalism doing what capitalism does best, which is to keep us tired enough to keep playing the game. So today we're going to talk about why rest isn't lazy, why burnout is really expensive, and why choosing to rest in a world that wants you exhausted, especially right now, is one of the most radical wealth strategies that you can make. So let's start with what is happening right now. When I'm recording this episode, we're knee-deep into fall, and every day we are being bombarded with headlines about threats to our democracy, about inflation, about tariffs, about the government shutdown, about layoffs, about horrific actions that the current administration is taking. And meanwhile, workers and everyday folks across the country are still struggling, especially those who are out of work and not being paid. But all of us, groceries are still really expensive. Buying a house feels next to impossible. And many folks have 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Everywhere you look, people are tired, they're burnt out, they're exhausted. They're struggling. And this is not like I stayed up too late last night scrolling TikTok, or I went out with my friends, and so now, I'm a little exhausted kind of tired. This is like bone deep, soul level, how do we catch a breath tired? And what does the system say or feel about this tired? Well, they're just constantly telling us work harder, hustle more, just keep going. Take a mindfulness workshop. Just don't stop doing, don't stop producing, because the more you work, the more you'll get, the harder you work, the more you'll achieve. This is the air that we are breathing right now, and it is so incredibly toxic. Now, I'm gonna be super honest, I've been there, and in many ways, I'm still there because I'm feeling this stuff too every single day. But I can think back to when there were seasons of my life when I thought that if I could just push through, that I would finally get ahead. If I just, worked a little harder this week or this month, I would finally get that done. I'd finally get on top of this thing. I'd finally make more money. And then I told myself that I'd be able to rest when my business was stable, that I'd rest when my kid got older, that I'd rest after tax season, that I'd rest on the weekend, that I'd rest later when the to-do list magically shrank to 0, which, spoiler alert, it's never happened before and it's never going to, okay? But that's what I told myself. And then all of a sudden my body was like, sorry, but we're not playing this game anymore. We are done here. I have anxiety, I have depression, I had chronic fatigue, I have 0 energy, tight hips, my knees hurt, good brain fog. And I'm just constantly living in survival mode. And survival mode is not a wealth strategy. But being in survival mode doesn't mean you can't ever achieve wealth. So that's the thing that we're here to talk about today is that this idea that we think rest is optional, but rest is actually infrastructure. It is one of the core foundations of our bodies, our health, our lives, our businesses. It's what we absolutely need to do because it's a part of how we build our lives and our businesses that are going to last in a sustainable, healthy way. Now, I know that I'm not alone in feeling this. If you look around, we've got, teachers who, especially after COVID, are leaving the job. We've got nurses on strike. You've got delivery workers and restaurant workers. Everyone is saying we need more money, we need more resources, we need to not be in this constant state of survival. That we're burned out, that we can't do this anymore. And while we are constantly being made to feel like burnout is an individual failure, in reality, this is a collective crisis. Okay, but here is the twist. The system thrives on our exhaustion. And especially right now, with everything going on politically, the current administration is thriving on our exhaustion. And it's why they are intentionally throwing thing after thing after thing after thing at us. Every single day, there's a new thing. And then there's another new thing, because it's keeping us exhausted. It's keeping us in that survival mode. And it's keeping us in a place where we think, what's the point? Because we're never going to get ahead, right? It's convincing us that maybe on our better days, that if we just work harder, then maybe we will finally make it. But meanwhile, that exhaustion is keeping us way too tired to even question why this is the way it works in the first place, why the rules are written this way. So, my message to you today is that rest is not just personal self-care. It's actually one of the best forms of resistance that we have. And it's resistance to a system that profits off of keeping us depleted. And so, I'm going to just say rest is political. It is a political tool that is being currently wielded against us, but we have the power to be able to take it. If you're not completely convinced about this, or maybe you are, but I just want you to think about for a second, who gets to rest in this country? Who can afford to take a vacation, to unplug, to say no to overtime? Who gets parental leave and who doesn't? Who gets to have a nanny, a housekeeper, versus who is the nanny or the housekeeper? We know that rest is a privileged thing. Rest is rationed and divided up and allocated along race and gender and class lines. And it's always been this way, right? I mean, we can go back to the time of slavery and enslaved people and who was resting and who was working. So this is not new. There is a reason why Black and brown activists, from the civil rights movement to, everything going on today, have framed rest as a radical act, because this system was literally built on the exploitation of bodies who were denied rest. And that legacy has not really changed. It's just taken a different form. It just puts on a suit and calls itself, hustle culture, right? So now here's where I think money actually comes into the conversation. And I think this is such an important piece to talk about. So many of us do not rest because we feel like we can't afford to. In fact, probably most people rest because they feel like they can't afford to. I'll rest when the bills are paid. I'll rest when the debt's gone. I'll rest when the business is more stable, right? All things that I've said, all things that I think many of you have probably said. And so rest starts to feel like something that you earn or you have to work for instead of something that you deserve. And that's the lie. Because if your money feels unstable, if you're never quite sure what's coming in or what's going out, then rest is always going to feel out of reach. And that's why clarity around your money matters, not just having spreadsheets because someone once told you need to have a spreadsheet, but because when you know where you stand, what your financial position is today, then you can do something about it. And when you have an understanding and you have clarity around your resources, you can breathe a little bit easier. And when you can breathe, rest becomes possible. And I say this even for folks who are struggling with money. Sometimes even just having the clarity, even if the problem hasn't been solved, can give you the space to be able to take that rest. So I want to tell you a story. I've changed the name, but we're going to call this person Tanya. So let's just say Tanya is a single mom running an online consulting business. Tanya is brilliant at what she does. She's, our clients love her. She's got, lots of work coming in, but Tanya hasn't taken a single day off in the last 2 years. 2 years, Tanya has not taken a vacation or any kind of a rest. And Tanya's fear, and by the way, this is a true story about someone. So, everything I'm saying here is something that someone has said to me. Tanya's fear was that if she stopped, that everything would collapse. She used those words, everything will collapse. That her clients would leave, her bills wouldn't get paid, her kids wouldn't get fed and get what they needed, and she would never be able to catch up again. That even if she took a pause, she would get behind. So even if it didn't completely collapse, she'd be behind and then she'd never be able to catch up, right? Now, when Tanya and I actually dug into her finances, we realized that she actually did have enough consistent revenue to pay herself a bit more of a modest, steady salary, and separately also realized that she was bleeding cash in, some areas that maybe she hadn't really been paying attention to. And so by shifting a few things, we were able to not only give Tanya some clarity around her numbers, but also free up some resources so that she gave herself permission to actually start taking one Friday a month off every single month. And spoiler alert, nothing bad happened. Nothing collapsed, okay? But what did happen was that Tanya was able to finally get some rest. She was able to finally kind of exhale and be able to actually have some space on her own outside of being a mom, outside of running this business. And that is the power of clarity in her situation. And it's why it's so critical to understand that rest is not being reckless. Rest is being responsible. And I know a lot of folks may be thinking, yeah, but that's not my situation. I know my numbers and the money just isn't there. And for you, I just want to say that one of the things we do inside of our community is talk about the cost of non-monetary things. So, you go buy a computer or you pay for gas, that's something you're paying money currency for. But when you are doing something that is causing you harm, there is a cost to that. And it may be a monetary cost. It's probably also a cost in health and other areas, as in relationships or whatever other areas as well. And so when we're talking about rest, when we're not taking rest, when we're not making the time for rest, not finding the time, because you're not going to find the time. The time isn't magically there and you've lost it. It's about making the time for rest. There is a cost to that. And we need to understand that cost and what's going to happen if we don't make that time for it. And I know that can be really, really challenging for folks. So I want to just recognize and acknowledge that, but also help you understand that there is a cost there too. And that can't be ignored. And so speaking of that cost, I want to get real about what burnout actually does cost us, because I think a lot of us are living in burnout, and it may be from work, it may be from family stuff, it may be from personal stuff, it may be from the state of the world, or very likely it's a combination of a lot of those areas. But burnout or the lack of rest costs us a lot of really important things. Number one, it costs us creativity. That spark when you first started your business, or that spark when you're doing work that really matters to you, burnout smothers that. And that spark is really important to be able to continue to show up in the world in the way that you want. Burnout costs us relationships. When you're fried, even the people you love start to feel like demands on your time. They start to feel like you're not really there for them. And that can really have a lasting impact. Burnout costs us health. It could look like, for me, it's migraines, it's chronic pain, chronic fatigue, anxiety, depression, mental health struggles. Our bodies keep the receipts, and those receipts add up and they cost a lot for us across the board. And burnout also costs us wealth, because when you're in survival mode, if you can't plan, then you can't strategize, then you can't build. And so burnout actually is really expensive, even when it feels like you have no choice because the bills have to get paid. Now, for many of us, rest feels so scary because we're also dealing with debt. or maybe just bills piling up that we can't get ahead of, right? So debt sits on our shoulders and basically it's whispering like, keep going or else if you stop, it's all going to fall apart, right? It turns rest into this guilty pleasure, this like self-care, thing instead of a human necessity. And part of it is because many of us don't have safety nets. We don't have emergency funds. We don't have insurance. We don't have a working spouse. We don't have a backup plan. And so rest feels reckless, like, you know, driving our car with absolutely no brakes, right? And I get that. And that's what society has taught us to think. But here's the truth, building those support systems, whether it is paying down your debt, whether it's setting aside a little cushion in an emergency savings account, or even just putting one protective system in place can change how rest feels. It can help turn it from guilt into maintenance, into something that is necessary to keep sustaining you. Think about this like, changing the oil in your car, right? That's not something that you're going to skip or apologize for. That's just something you need to do to keep the engine going. Well, that's what rest is for us. So I want to tell you another story. This is a historical story to kind of show you that there is a bigger picture here too. That's really important. So we're going to dive back into history for a second. I was listening to a podcast a few weeks ago, and I learned something that I had never knew about. I wish I could remember the name of the podcast. If I find it, I'll share it. But it was a story about how Henry Ford is, for lots of faults, is the person to thank for the concept of the weekend. And so back in the 1920s, Henry Ford was looking for a way to boost car sales and wanted to increase worker productivity and well-being. And at the time, the status quo was long, arduous work days and work weeks. Most workers only got Sundays off, and they were just so exhausted from their work weeks that Sundays were meant for rest, which meant they really didn't leave the house. They didn't drive anywhere. And obviously, that wasn't great for someone who wanted people to buy more cars. And so Ford figured out that if he gave them an additional day off, Saturdays, that they would now have the time and energy to actually go places. And if they were going to go places, they would need cars to do that. So lo and behold, once he implemented the 40-hour work week, which included the weekend, having Saturdays and Sundays off, it's a two-day weekend for his workers, Ford saw car sales increase as well as the well-being of his workers. Now, I don't think anyone's going to sit here and say that Ford did this solely because he cared about his workers. He did it to boost sales, but nonetheless, it was still a move that helped people. And so for that, we're grateful because it didn't just help his workers, it took off. And so here was the thing. At the time that Ford was doing this, for workers at other car companies, this trend didn't actually catch on immediately. Everyone sort of thought Ford was like, why is he doing this? This isn't going to work. Like, this is not a good idea. So it wasn't actually until the 30s and the 40s when the labor movement came into play and really fought for that 40-hour work week for all workers, that which included the weekends off. It also included things like child labor laws, like lots of things that we take for granted now. So it wasn't until then that this became widespread. But these were fights for rest. These were fights advocating for workers to have rest. And so now we're here and we're in 2025 when we're recording this, and we're still fighting these fights. We're still trying to get, workers livable wages. We're seeing workers strike across the board to get livable wages. We're still trying to get childcare support for working parents. People are literally dying because they can't afford to take sick days. So when you rest, you're not just caring for yourself. You are taking part in a much bigger act of resistance. One that says, my worth is not defined by my productivity. So what do we do with all this? Where do we go from here? Like, okay, great, you're telling me to rest, but again, I don't have the money, I don't have the time. Like, what do I do? My recommendation, and what I'm doing myself, is to start small. It could be as simple as taking 1 hour off a week without guilt, like just one more hour carving out without guilt. It could be closing your laptop before midnight, one day a week. It could be just budgeting for rest the same way that you budget for groceries. When you're mapping things out, finding time for that. I will tell you one thing I've been doing is recognizing that even if it's a work day and even if I have something I have to do, if I'm feeling really tired or really run down, I don't force myself to do it because I recognize that that is going to make me not okay. I say, nope, this is a time when I need rest. I close my laptop, I go take a nap, I go take a walk, whatever I need. And I 100% of the time when I come back eventually to do that thing, I do it faster and I do it better. So it's not actually costing me time in the long run. It's just about doing things a little bit differently. Okay. Because the thing that I want you to understand is that rest isn't separate from building wealth. Rest is a critical part of building wealth. And wealth isn't just about money, remember. It's about your energy. It's about freedom to make the decisions you want. It's about choice to choose the things that are best for you and your family. And so rest is how we make sure that we have the capacity to fight, the capacity to dream, the capacity to create, and the capacity to make an impact in this world. So here is my challenge to you. Notice when you feel guilty for resting. Whose voice is that really? Is it a parent, a boss, the culture that told you that your value equals your output? And then I want you to push back. I want you to take a nap. I want you to go for the walk. I want you to step away from the screen. I want you to get outside. I want you to, spend time with your kids or, somebody you love. I want you to do all of this and I want you to call it maintenance. And I want you to understand that this is a strategic move that will pay dividends for you. Whatever you need to tell yourself, you need to claim this time. Because the truth is, you don't build equitable, impactful, generational wealth by grinding yourself into dust. You build it by protecting your capacity to keep going. So that's it for today's episode of Disrupt Your Money, my friends. If you felt yourself like bristle or squirm during this conversation, good. That's what we're here for. That's the part of you that's been conditioned to believe that rest is lazy, and it's time to call bullshit on that. So I want you to do something radical this week. I want you to rest without apology, even if it's for 5 minutes. I want you to treat it like the investment that it is, because the system may want your exhaustion, but your liberation requires your energy. Until next week, my friends.